Well, for more on the Federal Reserve's independence and its role, I'm joined now by Stephen Kyle. He's an associate professor at the S.C. Johnson College of Business at Cornell University. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, your average person isn't following all these central bank announcements and forecasts, and their impact isn't always clearly communicated to the public. Just how has the Federal Reserve's communication with the public evolved since its inception?
Well, it is now the case that the Federal Reserve is quite open. They have said for many years, at least this is the third, at least, Federal Reserve Chair who has said that we will be guided by data as it comes in, and indeed they are, and do their best to avoid surprises. It wasn't always the case. Certainly Alan Greenspan tried to be as opaque as he could when he went and talked to Congress or spoke publicly. It was somewhat of a parlor game with economists to try and figure out what on earth the man meant when he said whatever it was he said. Nowadays, it's really not that hard to interpret if you really are interested in these kinds of things, which, as you said, most of the population isn't. The Federal Reserve has said today that they're going to keep interest rates where they were, but change wording very slightly to indicate that their next move in interest rates is likely to be down and not up, which we thought we already knew, but they confirmed that ever so slightly more than they did before, though they are keeping rates where they are for the moment.
And let's talk about the data points that the Fed looks at. How have the key metrics for making these interest rate decisions changed over the years to really sort of adapt to some of these new or emerging trends or threats in the economy?
Well, there is no data that they won't look at and take into their calculation. But as your lead-in suggested, their main goal is to keep inflation stable around 2%, and given that, to maximize employment and growth as much as they can. If you look at what's going on in the economy on those two fronts, inflation is and has been for a while below their 2% goal, which would say, well, there's no reason to cut rates on those grounds. On the other hand, there are signs that the growth may be slowing a bit, although it's fair to say that the data are very much mixed on that front. Chairman Powell admitted as much and said they will be guided by the data that comes in the future. I believe they really are at a balance point where they think things are good and could go either way, and they're going to wait and see what happens.
Now, what about preparing for or reacting to crises, whether they be financial, national security, terror threats? How is that factored into monetary policy?
Well, it's certainly the case that they would like to keep their powder dry, so to speak. In other words, they want to have room to lower rates if there is a crisis, which means that they will be reluctant to cut rates in a precautionary way. With rates right now between 2.25% and 2.5%, there's not a lot of room between that level and zero, which is as low as they can go. So in case there is a crisis, they want to have some bullets still in their guns, so to speak, so that they have something they can do if that happens.
And who have been the most notable Fed chairs, and what will they be remembered for most?
Well, Alan Greenspan certainly was chair for a long time, will be remembered for being very opaque and Delphic. He has been criticized ex post for not recognizing the puncturing of the dot-com bubble and being responsible for the lead up to the 2008-2009 crash. But I have to say that you'd been hard-pressed at the time to find anybody who really seriously disagreed with what he did. Since that time, we have had Ben Bernanke, who is completely competent, very good. Janet Yellen, equally competent, very good. And Jerome Powell, also competent, though unfortunately not an economist. We economists are a little bit unhappy about that, but everyone was relieved, I gotta say, when Powell was appointed, because he is a sober, competent man who takes his job seriously.
Now, we know that the president has nominated the head of the Federal Reserve since the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, but it doesn't explicitly say that a president cannot fire a Fed chair. So with President Trump being very vocal about his disappointment about the Fed strategy, could the central bank's independence be threatened?
It is possible, but to most of us, it is almost unimaginable that they would actually do that. Never in the 100-plus year history of the Federal Reserve has anything like that happened, because central bank independence is a prized thing which has reputational effects which are easy to lose and hard to get back. people will be talking about banana republicanism if they do succeed in pressuring the Federal Reserve. I have no doubt that President Trump will take credit if there is a rate cut, and that's fine. Politicians do that kind of thing all the time. But there never in history has been a president or a politician in this or any other country who wanted their central bank to raise rates. They only ever want them to cut them, especially in the run-up to an election, and that's what we're seeing here.
Well, thank you very much. Always good to have you. Stephen Carr there, Associate Professor at the S.C. Johnson College of Business at Cornell University.